Hello, everyone, and welcome, and what a pleasure it is to be here. I tried to set up a few things here and there, so sorry if it's a little bit too loud or not. Apparently, on Sundays, it's very common for neighbors to just start hammering into the wall, but I hope it's not too loud. So hello, everyone, and welcome, and thank you so much for having me, and warm greetings to Vietnam, of course, as well. Now, from my end, it's been kind of interesting to, when I was discussing with Jonathan, thank you so much, Jonathan, for having me and the wonderful crew as well. When I was discussing what we'll be speaking about, what will be the topic of the conversations we're going to have, one topic came up, and that topic is pretty much has kept me busy, I would say, for the last couple of months and years. So let me share the screen with you so we can actually just jump in right away. Here, just a second. So for some reason it stopped. Oh, hold on. Ah, here we go. I just need to, sorry, my friends, just a second. Ah, here we go. Now that's working. Right, sharing buttons. Why are they always so difficult to find? So this is a bit unexpected, but let me just see to make sure I got everything. Buttons. No, I can't see anything here. Zoom, don't let me down at this point. Hold on, dear friends, because it's always a little bit strange. I mean, I can't see the button to share. It has been hidden. All right, here we go. Oh, wow. This is a wonderful beginning of our adventure here, but don't worry, we'll get through this just fine, right? So I think that works, magical. So if you can see the red cat, please write a plus in the chat. I hope that is actually working. And I hope it is working. Let's see how this goes, right? So, fantastic. So basically, what I've been busy with for the last couple of years is kind of really, as Jonathan was saying, kind of paying attention to all the fine details. And I don't think that they are, the point of them is to just, pay attention to details. I think it's sometimes the difference between clarity and ambiguity. And I tried very hard to make sure that people can kind of do the thing that they want to do and need to do in a product, avoiding ambiguity and making sure that everything is perfectly clear. And what I want to highlight today are some of the things that maybe are surprising or were surprising when we actually looked into this data and when we looked into how people are using different products over the years. And so what I would like to cover and look into are very different and I would say also quite difficult areas. Because when you look at how do we design for children, we'll look into how do we design for teenagers or Gen Z or aging population. And then, of course, for people with autism, dyscalculia, deafness, and blindness, and situations where people happen to be in stress. It's all very complex areas. And I mean, we can by no means cover all of that in half an hour. But this would be sort of a conversation starter that we can then continue in the Q&A and also maybe later. Right? Because when I look at this, right, I think that we often see articles about how to design for Gen Z, how to design for children, how to design for teenagers, how to design for accessibility. And I think that's very often we're missing that this is one of the many different parts of the experience that we need to accommodate for. Because one of the first questions that I ask in almost every single project is not necessarily the design brief of what we're supposed to do here, and not necessarily the business objective of what are we trying to achieve here, and not necessarily, the research of what have we already done, what do we know. I actually want to see in which context this product that we're designing, that we're creating, that we're building, in which context will it be used and how? Because the environment in which users are, the expertise and the type of users that we of course have, they all set expectations about what we need to accomplish and how we need to accomplish that. And I think this is often a missing bit. So what I want to see is not necessarily, again, the design brief. I want to be in a room where somebody is using this product, or at least get a glance into how they're using it. And the age, for example, the level of expertise, it's just one of the many factors that influence these expectations. Just to make it a bit more clear, if we look at the example like this is a very complicated dashboard that you would be using maybe when you're traveling on, boats and you want to track the status of things, and maybe also have some like, enterprise world, right? What you will find here is that when we look at this, we can say, well, we can maybe improve the color contrast here. Maybe we can add labels to the icons and stuff like that. But that doesn't make sense if you don't know how it will be used. So what I want to see is this, the messiness of the real workspace where people are going to use this product, right? What I also want to see is, what kind of screens do they have? What kind of settings do they have? What kind of conditions are they working with? It could also be that they need to be working in very stressful conditions or situations like that. And kind of really important to keep that in mind. That's the first caveat. And the second caveat is that every time we speak about anything that we want to cover, right, I think it's important to understand that even like Gen Z spans 20, 25 years of difference. So we cannot just say this is how you design for Gen Z. We always need to zoom in, or I'd rather say, well, probably zoom in and look at the specific age range. Usually 5 years maximum would be a good way to kind of look into it and think about it, right? And so this is always something that I try to keep in mind when we're designing pretty much anything. All right, so what does it mean for us? Well, when we start looking into the different groups that I wanted to cover, let's just start from the start, ultimately trying to make sure that everybody feels included and everybody can do what they want to do. That also goes for children. Now, when we're thinking about children and how to design for children, these are ages 3 to 12. And very often, of course, the expectation that we might have is just coming in as adults. We kind of need to study what the motivation and what the interest of a child is. And very often they tend to lose focus very quickly. Their motivation changes very quickly as well. And they kind of need the sense of steady achievements, right? So we need to reward and encourage small wins. Now, typically, when you think about designing for children, we'll look at, think about something like this. Very bright, very colorful. You might even say simple, but there are some fine little details that actually make all the difference in the world. And again, if you look at, again, let's say somebody who is at the age of, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? Or beyond that, well, it will not be as simple, let's say, right? And we often think about educational apps. We often think about games. We often think about, things that are designed specifically for children, of course, with that in mind. But very often it's also other applications that need to have something like a children mode, right? Like, for example, when we're looking at YouTube Kids, right? Where it will be, of course, very different, and we kind of need to accommodate for that. So what does it mean? Well, that means that when we think about children that start at the age of 3 to 5, they learn very quickly how to swipe and to scroll, and probably the first thing that they learn is the video controls and the home button. And unsurprisingly then, when we look at the interfaces and what they look like, typically you'll find very big, very huge, almost like 80 to 90 pixels width and height minimum, right? Areas where they can tap and click and interact with. And of course, this is a sort of a website, right? But it will also be apps, and in the beginning it will be apps. So also things like video players must be really, really large, because being precise is very, very difficult, right? But at the same time, right, when we think about designing for children, we kind of need to be very clear that when we're designing for children, we're also designing for parents, right? And there are no worse customers than parents, because parents are the most demanding users you might think of. They have no mercy in reviews and ratings, and they need very different things than what we maybe have in most, SaaS products or so. They need safety guarantees, regulations, certifications, or anything that's kind of recommended by doctors or by teachers or anything like that. So when we look at Duolingo, unsurprisingly, of course, you'll find a lot of confirmation of that by research, by what parents are saying, what doctors are saying, and so on and so forth, right? So this will be always a part of the story. That also means that when we're designing for children, we'll always need to think about a few things, like, for example, parental controls, right? We need to think about time limits. We need to think about rules, permissions, access, right? The authentication and stuff like that. And what's also quite interesting that parents usually are willing to pay extra to avoid anything that's annoying or disturbing, like, for example, advertising, right? This is why when you're actually designing an application for children, you probably can set it at a relatively high price as long as it actually does its job well. But on the other hand, when we think about what it means for children, well, obviously we need to kind of work with visuals, bright visuals. We need to work with icons and sounds. We might want to have something like storytelling. The content, again, must be fitting the audience. So it must be age appropriate. Large text, large step targets, and so on and so forth. And that's interesting. This is something that you will find in quite a bit of academic research about it. We usually need to use fonts that approximate how children learn to write, which is why, fonts like this are much more common, right? In, of course, applications for children, because it resembles how they learn and how they're writing. I mean, it can be very playful like this. It could also be maybe a little bit more formal like that, or even more formal like this, but still kind of approximates how people are learning to write. And I think there is one significant part that I actually just want to highlight. Most of the time, when you think about designing applications for children in general, there is a sense of we need to reward all the time. And yes, this is how you get attention. But then at the same time, there are two types of rewards. There is extrinsic motivation that's coming from, hey, you did well, here is a carrot for you, right? And there is an intrinsic motivation, right? Meaning this must be something that people want to do. Like imagine if you really like painting, right? You don't need a carrot from somewhere, right? You just do this because you want to. And the big tasks that many applications need to perform when it comes to, designing for children is how do we encourage this sort of self-motivated sense of accomplishment that is not connected to any external rewards, right? So this is a sense of belonging. This is a sense of community, maybe interacting with other children and something like that. There's also a sense of competence that they're building up a skill, but also the sense of autonomy that they can do some things independently and that they actually kind of feel this sense of accomplishment. That's, I think, is something that's often missing. If you want to learn a bit more about this, there's a wonderful article, lengthy article by Paula Gomez on how to increase players' intrinsic motivation, which I think is very often underrated and dismissed. And on the other hand, there is a fantastic book on designing for kids by Deborah Levin-Gallman. I highly recommend you to read it as well, right? Now, as we keep going, eventually we get to design for teenagers. Now, teenagers are the best usability testers. You can never get a better usability tester than a teenager because they do not filter. They tell what they think, and they say exactly how they feel about it. And very often, this sort of sense of honesty is very difficult to get from any other groups, like at all, right? Which is really interesting. But it's important how to approach them and how to speak to them. Because if you speak down to them as, being an adult, treating them like a child, then they just blocked or they just run away because, again, this is a sense of pride almost. So it's much more useful to think about them as younger adults and not children. An interface has to reflect that. So if you start thinking about, presenting them with some content, because they're 13 to 17 years old, presenting them with some content for 10 years old, right? There's a massive difference in between, so they will just run away. And we should not underestimate their skills either. The application that they are going to use will be a little bit more technical, of course, than the games that we saw before. They still will be using videos, like video players and YouTube and so on and so forth, but probably not YouTube for kids necessarily, right? Of course not. But then you have a lot of educational tools like this or like this, right? Which are going to look like a little bit more like, the application that we're used to. As you can see, even those little things, like the fonts, right, change and they become more like, the Arial and stuff like that. But every now and again, they still will have this playfulness as well. Now, I was very shocked when I learned about the behavior that teenagers expose, because when you look at what we should be expecting, right, most teens have mobile devices, but not all of them will have laptops. To many, default search is not Google and not ChatGPT and not Perplexity, but YouTube. So they will look for an answer to that question on YouTube rather than Google, right? It might be changing now because they will be like looking more and, AI, of course, if they kind of grow up with ChatGPT, they'll be probably using that. But this is important, right? And especially when you look at ChatGPT, which does not necessarily convey this sort of links. I mean, that's convey links, but not these little thumbnails for videos. But Perplexity does, right? So YouTube is, could be perceived as a default search. They have very little patience and focus, but that pretty much everybody who's grown with a mobile phone kind of experiences that in some way. And also have low tolerance for slower passive activities, right? What's also quite interesting on this, oh, hold on, it just stopped, is that usually we have this misconceptions that it's all about social media, it's all about playing games, it's all about Instagram. No, that's not true at all. Like this is where you start seeing teenagers doing a lot of stuff for school, right? They still have difficulty formulating search queries, so very good autocomplete is very important there, right? They're very good and quite efficient in skimming key points and especially skimming long text blocks. They'll be probably just jumping down, right? But they also do things that are necessary, like shopping, right? So it's not uncommon to see an Amazon app, let's say on a child's or teenager's phone, right? But also a lot of school related stuff, maybe sports related stuff, things like that actually starts emerging as well. Sometimes, and that would be very surprising, you'll find even something like self-organization tasks, like the scheduling application, the calendars already in that age, which is quite interesting, right? And I think we should not underestimate that teenagers are very proficient on mobile. I mean, they can do magical things on mobile. Whatever you need to do, they will know their mobile device in and out. But if you give them a task to complete something on desktop, like in Excel or something, they will really struggle because this is a very different mode of interaction, right? And also, don't forget that very often teenagers don't really own like a fancy new MacBook Pro or whatever. They have maybe an old machine, maybe slightly broken machine, maybe slightly slow machine in general. And if we don't meet the expectations even there, then they're just gone. There is a wonderful article on how to conduct user research with teens. Again, there is no better audience than teens. I kindly recommend you to explore that as well. I forgot to add a link. It's on answerlab.com, right? So there is that, right? And then comes the next part, right? Which is really exciting, which is, of course, Gen Z. Now, I mean, although, of course, there is a new next generation coming in as well now at this point, right? But when you think about Gen Z, mm, it's really strange because, again, this is probably the only generation which is so diverse that we have real problem looking at a generation through the lens of 5 years. When you're designing for Gen Z, you probably need to look into like 2 years, maybe 3 years. Because when you look at younger people in general, right, what we will find is that especially people who have been maybe in their 20s, 22, 23 or so over the last couple of years, they are quite different compared to what you see people who maybe are now 30, or like becoming like 25, 30. There is quite significant difference. The difference is people who are a little bit older now, like around 25, 30 or so, right? They will be at the 25, 30? Yeah, that's like 20, 25, well, 23, 25, 27, something-ish, like that, right? You'll find that they are really diverse, and they're diverse in terms of identity, race, ethnicity. They're very caring, they're very proactive, so we shouldn't be dismissing Gen Z as a slow, passive, and mindless generation as it's often perceived. It's not the case at all. Now, what we do know, of course, is like every young generation, you need to have bring their attention. And the attention can be brought by bright, vibrant color schemes, of course, right? This is not a surprise that a lot of application will look very modern and cool and sleek, and also have very, very bright color schemes, right? This is something that's actually come up quite a bit. For example, Wise Bank is a great example of that. Like going all in with all the fine, like really friendly, bright green, but also a lot of really big, I would say vibrant, like really colorful things that are appearing there, right? And going all the way also in terms of how they're speaking to their customers. It's not just the design, it's also the writing. That is expected, right? This is expected. I should really emphasize that. This sort of authenticity, the honesty, because Gen Z, like as a generation in general, are usually very, very good at avoiding anything that looks suspicious because they've been doing this on the internet through their entire life. So they really value authenticity. And in fact, you will never put something like a stock images for Gen Z. This would be just dismissed right away. And you would never put something like a illustration of a product instead of a screenshot. No, screenshot would work much better than an illustration of a product. So they need to have this sort of authenticity, right? And it also goes to the fact that what you find is that this authenticity has to be real, and it should not feel like, prettied up or cleaned up. This is something that's sort of normal. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there is this Ryanair. Ryanair is a low-cost airline in Europe. And everybody loves to hate it, but it's still quite popular. So Voros here has written or posted on whatever it is on Facebook, I think. Well, we didn't pay and ended up sitting together because by default, Ryanair splits people apart, so you have to pay extra to sit together, right? And so they posted that. And then Ryanair, official Ryanair account replies, oh, we'll find you, right? And you might say, well, this is weird. Why would a brand do that? Well, it's kind of also authenticity, right? It's a way of how a brand is speaking as if it was, a person that they know, right? And it might be that it's deliberate, and I'm sure it is, right, by Ryanair. But this is not like, oh, you have, like it's not formal, like, oh, you have disrupted or you have broken the rules and whatever, right? It's like, we'll find you, right? That's not necessarily nice, but this is authentic, right? On the other hand, when we look again at what we should be expecting from Gen Z, well, this is again a bit different because large parts of Gen Z are not mobile first, but also mobile only, right? Especially again, if you're born, let's say in 2010, right? Then you are kind of in these teenage years right now, right? There is a strong emphasis on fairness and purpose. Also, work-life balance, sustainability, I think we know that. And of course, there are some things that are just inherently related or connected to accessibility. Like, for example, there is a very strong majority that turns on closed captioning or subtitles by default. This is just a part of what they do all the time, right? And on the other hand, it really reflects in with things that we see around the world. Like this, right? Posters like this, right? ROI. Now that we've got your attention of people who work in marketing, please buy our cereal. What the hell is this? And you would say, this is just strange. Why would you have this and pay, I don't know, tens of thousands of dollars to do this, right? Or this? This is all it says. Please buy our cereal, right? But this comes across much better than a fancy presentation of cereal that you would usually find, which is really, really surprising, right? And it kind of keeps going. It's not just them doing that. Sometimes you will find it just going all the way a little bit too far, like this, right? I mean, yeah, I don't know how you feel about this design, but maybe I wouldn't feel extremely excited about getting this and seeing this, right? So Comic Sans, indeed, as long as writing here is enjoying its pickup, I guess, right? On the other hand, also, just one thing that I think we should be mentioning here is that it's actually, and this is why I'm quite excited about Gen Z, right? Although, again, people who are maybe younger in the 20s now, like maybe 18 to 21, they're much more conservative and less accessibility first, right? But that depends, of course, on the situation around the world. And also the COVID, which had a dramatic impact on how people perceive themselves and the world around them. We can speak about it in the Q&A later. That's been a massive, massive shift there. But because Gen Z is so diverse, their needs are usually very diverse too. And they also communicate with people who are diverse. So for the first time ever, I think, and this is really impressive, I have to say, inclusion, accessibility, authenticity are becoming a default expectations of the generation, which is great, right? It is really great. Well, the question is what will be happening afterwards, but this is really fantastic to see. All right, as we're moving forward, I still have no idea how much time we have because I started a little bit late, but maybe just 5 more minutes if I may. I think I will be hopefully told in the chat if I'm running late. Sorry, Jeremy, if I'm late. Well, I think there is one more specific thing that we really don't spend enough attention on, and that's aging population as well, right? Because there is at this point 1 billion people, right? 1 billion people who are age 60 plus, who live today. Very often, when we think about aging population, we think about a particular threshold like 60, 65 plus or 70, 70 plus, right? And we often come with stereotypes around them, which are very often wrong because we shouldn't be forgetting that just like they also have grown up in the internet world. They also have grown up in a world which kind of emphasized healthiness, fitness, gym, yoga, and all the things that contribute positively to health conditions, right? So very often you will find that people who are above 60 are very healthy, right? Well, really healthy, active, and with a solid income and capital to spend, right? Also, they're often ignored and seen as one single entity. This is really, really dangerous as well, because very similar to what you get with maybe Gen Z, you kind of need to be a bit careful here. So at best, what you can do is say 60 to 65, 65 to 70, 70 to 75, but you cannot just overgeneralize and say everybody who is above 60 is behaving like this or like that, right? Now, there is a big study on how to design for aging population by Michael Halperin, so you can go ahead and download it as well. It's called Login. But in many ways, what you will find is that we actually really need to break the aging population stereotypes and myths. So we shouldn't assume that they don't understand digital. They understand digital really well, right? What they need is clear products that make them feel independent and competent. And that's ironic because this is, and guys writing also here in the chat, the whole Gen Z section is so relatable. That makes me happy. But it's really interesting because these expectations, feel independent, competent, clear, in many ways, this is exactly the same story that we get when we're designing for children. Because children, or growing teenagers, I should say, they want to feel independent and competent. They don't need hand-holding. It's not like you need to guide them through the very simplified, oversimplified interface. It must be matching the expectations and the expertise and the context in which they are, as we mentioned earlier, right? And they need to be able to make progress on their own without, referring to help all the time. However, there are certain things that change as we grow, right? As we get older. With age, for example, it becomes more difficult to focus on close objects. So your eyesight gets worse. The shades of blue and purple, but also yellow and green becomes, looking very similar. So if you have, let's say, blue and purple in your brand style guide, right, for your colors, main colors of your product, and you're designing, let's say, banking application, and you kind of really have blue buttons and purple buttons, then you should be assuming that a lot of people of a particular age will have problems with that. The same also goes with yellow and green, right? They also experience that visuals that have a very similar contrast are becoming harder to tell apart. You also get a sense of reduced dexterity for, say, if you want to tap on buttons or so on the mobile phone, because precise movements are more difficult to achieve. But in general, we will find that there are different changes or effects that occur for pretty much everything that we kind of have or we exhibit in our body. Senses, movement, cognition, attitude. It's not very surprising, really. The problem, though, is that we often think that this occurs only at a specific age, which is not true at all. So as we are optimizing and designing with, aging population in mind, we're optimizing for everyone. Because these changes are unpredictable. They can occur at any point. Accidents, right? It can become at different ages, develop at different speeds, and reach different levels of severity. And occur, not all of them, hopefully occur in most people, but they will occur for some people. And so an impairment can appear sooner rather than later, or maybe never, right? Some people don't even realize that. For example, one thing that occurs quite a bit, this is what you will find when you start diving into these academic papers as well. A lot of people are not aware that they hear on one ear better than on the other, because usually you kind of use both, right? It's just one is maybe stronger or working harder than the other, right? It's actually quite common. The same also goes for eyesight, right? Now, this is something to probably maybe spot a little bit better, right? But this is always a part of the story. Everybody is in some way or the other on a continuum, right? So that's something to keep in mind. And this is just really important to keep in mind here as well, right? When we look at the over 60s, they have more real estate wealth on average, right? People in the early 60s have a median total wealth almost 9 times as high as people in the early 30s today, which means this is the audience that has the capital to spend. And most of the time, we don't even consider aging population at all. But if you're a banking application, right, you probably want to design with your older adults to make sure that your application is working for them or not. Otherwise, you might end up in a trouble, right? So there is that. And in general, I think just to wrap it up, right, because I think I could go forever, but I don't want to run too late here. When you think about everything that I've covered so far, I think we shouldn't be dismissing one generation or the other or kind of making assumptions about one generation or the other based on what we find on the internet, I would say. There is a lot of stuff that is, I would say, confusing or maybe even misleading. And the best thing to know about this is that independent on what age you currently have, you will see that people experience the same problems and they experience the same benefits as well. So this is the user behavior in 2025. When it comes to pop-ups and models appearing all of a sudden, the intention that most people kind of go with for it is to block it or avoid it or ignore it in some way. Push notifications are blocked. Chat window pop-ups are dismissed or blocked. Feedback widgets are blocked or not paid attention to. Install app prompts blocked. Importing contacts, oh no, thank you, not yet, not now, blocked. Geolocation permissions blocked. AI-powered chatbots, what a wonderful world in which we are. Fantastic, let's just have more AI-powered chatbots everywhere. Dismissed or minimized. Two-factor authentication, well, yeah, maybe we can do this later. Turn off your ad blocker. Nope, people are very good at dismissing it or avoiding it or going and finding something else. Access to camera is blocked. Auto-advancing carousels are skipped. So whenever carousel starts moving, people are very good at ignoring it and just scrolling down very quickly by using the space or clicking on space. Onboarding tutorials, where is my skip button? Email for newsletter, people are very good at using a disposable email. Please write a plus in the chat. If you already have or are using something like tempemail.org or these disposable temporary emails that are exist for 10 minutes or so and then disappear in a void, right? This is what people are really, really good at, especially again, the younger generation. They will not give you the right email. This is not happening. Forget it. If anything, if you say want to send somebody a PDF, expect a lot of temporary emails right there. And then when you're asking for gender, age, and phone input, fake. If you would disable copy paste, people will hate you. If you ask them to, complete puzzles with crosswalks and fire hydrants, they just cry because there is literally nothing you can do. And then, most of the time, except if you're in Germany, Switzerland, and Austria, GDPR cookie pop-ups or cookie prompts are kind of okay, right? So this is sort of the world in which we're living in 2025. This is not necessarily the most exciting world ever, I would say, right? However, this is I'm almost finished, I promise. However, one thing that I think I do need to say here is that the expectations are that we as designers can actually do better than this. Oops, sorry, not finished yet, almost there. Because this is what people like, and this is what they really, really appreciate once you give it to them. When things are fast and accessible, where you have text that people can read and it's well structured, when you have large checkboxes that look like checkboxes instead of radio boxes, when radio buttons look like radio buttons, when input boxes look like input boxes, where you can actually type in them, where you can clearly see focus states and active states in the form, when you have relatively simple password requirements, predictable tabbing, helpful error messages instead of generic ones that are blaming users that they're doing something wrong again, right? Decent autocomplete, when they hit refresh accidentally and data doesn't get lost, when the drop-down opens on tap or click instead of on hover, especially when you go with your mouse over a particular menu. Easy undos, alias cancellation. There are three things in life that people are afraid of. It's snakes, spiders, and the non-functional back button. So if the back button doesn't work, that's a real problem. So predictable back button is a good thing to have. And also a few little things. Using notifications, pausing subscriptions, and transparent pricing. This has been like this for the last 15 years. Nothing from this has changed. So, and that goes for every generation, right? So hopefully this gives us a bit of a compass about what we need to keep in mind as we're moving forward. So I put together a few things like this and more in a video course on smart interface design patterns. I also created a little coupon code, Love for Vietnam, which gives you a friendly 35% off on the pricing. So if you want to dive in on smart interface design patterns, please take a screenshot. Maybe this will become helpful later, or just click on the link, right? And also I've just launched, well, not just, a couple of months ago, launched another course on how to measure UX on design KPIs, where you will find also the same coupon code. So feel free to go ahead and use it, right? All right, so this is it. Maybe at this point, I'm just going to show a few cats and more cats. And I hope that this was useful, everyone. And thank you so much for being here and for paying attention to me. And sorry for being late.
Vitaly, thank you so much. As usual, just incredible.
My pleasure.
Valuable insights. Really means a lot that you could come and join us. It's interesting, when I listened to your presentation today, it feels like as a society we're evolving quicker between the generations. And so that makes your presentation even more pertinent, and that we kind of need to be conscious of this, and we can't just lump everyone into like two large archetypes,
Yes, I
old
agree.
group, young group, and then design for that. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
And your topic about optimizing for everyone, this is the message that everybody needs to hear. Because this assumption that everything happens to everyone like clockwork at the same time in their life is simply erroneous. It's a
yeah.
falsehood.
I
So when we
think the
take that assumption out of the picture, it really helps the design decision making.
Absolutely. I think that the best thing we can do, I mean, we can, of course, go ahead and say we're going to optimize specifically for this group or specifically for that group. But I think that the best thing we can do is to make sure that as we are designing, when we're designing, that we involve people from different, levels of expertise and different ages and so on and so forth, just so we have a diverse group that we can actually design with, right? Or at least listen to what their needs are. And I think that most of the time we just assume that we have a businesses assume that they have a specific view in mind about what the audience is like. And this is, I mean, dear friends, I've seen it being absolutely wrong. Just has no connection with reality. Because what businesses think people are and the user base is, sometimes it's vastly different, has nothing to do with whatever it is that they are kind of imagining. And that means to me, Jonathan, is that people who are coming to the product, they in the end decide if it's for them or not, of course, but the personality of a product is then shaped by this ongoing user base that they have rather than by people who are creating this product for specific audience. So this is sort of a weird thing. But if we actually
Yeah, and
account for different audiences, then we probably will be in the best place.
yeah, yeah, I agree. And your user behavior 2025 chart was it's a reality check that companies need to see, because we're inundated now with so many things coming from so many apps, and it's a whack-a-mole to close all of these things. And you have to wonder, where are these decisions made for that to be happening in these apps at such a concentration level? So I think people need to see that graph, basically. It was very good. Um, there was a question I wanted to ask. We
Mhm.
talked about the non-ideal situation. And I think sometimes when designers are sitting in their squeaky clean offices and they've got their 4K 27-inch screen and fiber internet and all of these things, I think it might be hard for them to transport themselves to these various scenarios and environments and situations that they need to be designing for. So I'm wondering if you have some, I don't know, tips or insights on this. I think something I had the privilege of working on earlier in my career was around a claims app. So if you got in a car accident, you could do on-site claims. And so you're, documenting what's happening, you're collecting
Mhm,
information,
mhm.
you're taking photos, you're entering details. The important part of that project was that we had to not only think about the interface just as a way of entering this data, but looking at all the factors that have just happened to that user. They've been in an accident. They're probably out in the middle of nowhere. They're in a low connectivity zone. There's sun beating down on their phone and they can barely see it. And they've been in an accident, so they have like adrenaline coursing through their body. So
Absolutely,
they're
of
literally
course.
shaking. And so all of a sudden, you can really start to have empathy for their state and the condition and that situation. Then you start designing. And so that was just so invaluable. What can you do to suggest to people to teleport themselves into an environment like that, where they're sitting physically, it doesn't resemble?
Yeah, I think that, of course, we cannot really kind of mimic the experience, like the stressful situation that somebody is going through. But what I did suggest, although it wasn't really adopted, I have to say, what I did suggest is that we should be doing, like all designers, right, in a team, we should be just having one day, just one day, when we go into the area where the last accidents happened, right? And we just try to complete a particular task, like filling in a form, right? Or let's say in your case, if it's accidents, right? And we're trying to fill in a form or something like that. Maybe then after that, we do like a little get together and we have lunch together or something like that, right? But you go in and you try to do that task in a very noisy street where you have a lot of stuff happening at the same time. On your mobile device, where the mobile phone, when you also have a glaring sun streaming at you. That's one thing. And the other thing that I always encourage to do, and that actually worked many times, it's really, really helpful, is to really establish something like a voice of the customer program, where you bring in users every now and again, or you kind of speak to end users, right? And trying to understand what do they complain about? What do they say? So they have a voice on the table as well. And that might be regular, and that's very often something that customer success teams would do. They would kind of establish that as well. And the closer we can bring somebody who is using a product to the table where decisions in the end are made, not only design decisions, but also product decisions, the more impactful it will be. But for me, if I can walk in a room where this product is used, to kind of understand the environment better, this is the most valuable thing ever. If you have access to customers that you can drop in, sometimes, of course, if it's healthcare, you cannot speak to doctors or so, but you can at least get a sense about how this particular product will be used or is being used, by whom, what kind of machines do they have? Do they have like a Dell from 2012? Or do they have, I don't
Well,
know, like IBM ThinkPad
likely.
or these little things? Like, yes, yes. But so what is this world in which they're actually operating? Because of course, if we're designing for, let's say, with our 4K screen, then everything looks beautiful and sharp. But if you have, let's say, 20 inch screen, then you will find that, and this is something I think really missing, is that we are always thinking about our product as this God-alike thing that we have created with so much love and passion, and we have that. It's everything, right? But we should not be forgetting that usually that wonderful thing that we created is one of 10, 15, 20 other tabs that people have open on a given day. They might also have 6 or 7 running applications at the same time. They might also have some Chrome extensions or Firefox extensions or something else that's disturbing them, right? And that's maybe slows everything down. Nothing lives in isolation. So design always lives somewhere in some context, and that context has to be explored. And the better we at least have a gonna get closer to it, the closer we get to it, the better we can design for it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think we have maybe just 1 or 2 more minutes because I'm getting a screen full of questions here and a very quick one. Are there some ethical considerations that are most important that stand out in your mind when designing digital products for children?
Yes, so I think that one of the really critical parts is about the motivation, because the games, the videos, or whatever it is that you have in your product has a tremendous application and impact on how the child is developing, right? So this is very, very difficult because, again, in many ways, the best thing you can do is when you are designing for children is that you really review the design with professionals. Because again, at this point, we might be thinking, okay, well, this is just, a little game here that they're playing and we have it's all vibrant and colorful, right? But you will be seeing that parents will appreciate if it's certified by a particular authority, right? You'll probably get a slightly better reviews and slightly better ranking as well as a result of that, although it might, of course, delay the product and all of that. But that's actually worth it. On the other hand, of course, what we also need to understand is that depending on the age, of course, very often children have a big problem distinguishing between banners, like ad banners, and content of an app. So they will accidentally click on that, and if they end up then in the YouTube environment with all kind of weird, creepy videos showing up, that's a real problem. So this is why what we need to do is provide really good guardrails in terms of what is possible, what the permissions are. Can they then go into something like a browser or not, right? And how does this work with ads at all? And so this is why, for example, for children's applications, parents are much more willing to pay for it to avoid all this stuff and really keep these guardrails in order. So the best thing is, I guess, that and motivation. Motivation is you can really trick people into believing that the best thing for them is to respond to whatever the outer world gives them. And that becomes a serious issue over time because then they are not proactive anymore and they don't know what they don't know how to develop their own internal confidence and comfort or skills related to that. That's a really dangerous part. I mean,
Yeah,
it's really difficult. I would say it's designing for children is very, very hard.
yeah. But I think what you put forth is very sound advice. The motivation, I think, is the big one. And we're seeing those dark motivations out there, and man, it's
Oh,
scary when
yes,
it's put
of
in front of
course.
a kid. Wow. With that, unfortunately, we're out of time. I can see the questions lining up. I hope maybe they can reach out to you on chat or in
Oh,
other
sure.
forums. You're very active across many of the platforms. Thank you very much, Vitaly, for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin, and greetings to everyone. See you hopefully soon again, everyone. Bye bye.
Take care.